You know, when you hear vocals and they just sound expensive, they're like clean, neat, fit perfectly in the mix, and there's no fault that you can see on that vocals. Many of us think it's because of an expensive EQ or compressor, but it's not EQ or compressor or anything else. There's this one magic plugin that makes your vocals sound like it's very expensive. We're gonna look at a concept called saturation, and we're gonna go through what and all it means and how even you can add it. Doesn't matter what DAW you have or whether what plugin you have, you can do it at your home studio and you can make the vocal sound expensive. So if you are new here, I'm Florina Jain, otherwise known as Flow of Music, and I'm going to teach you what is meant by saturation. This is my vocals without saturation. You're the one. Now with saturation. You're the one. There's like clarity coming through it, right? Let's learn this in deep. What makes vocal sound expensive? That's the $1,000,000 question. Because we've learned EQ, compressor, and you've seen multiple tutorials on it. But saturation is a concept that's a little tricky to understand as a beginner. So I'm going to break it down in the most simplest form so you can understand it clearly. So basically, saturation is all about harmonics, which means you're adding some extra sounds to the original sound that makes it sound clear and rich. For example, let's look at this project where I have a lead vocal, and if the lead vocal is just there, this is what it sounds like. 'Cause there we are again on that. It was fine, right, by itself. But I have done some harmony. So this is called alto soprano, where you do harmony. So with this, it sounds like this. 'Cause there we are again on that. Once again, this is before. 'Cause there we are again on that. Now with this. 'Cause there we are again on that. Instantly you heard that the vocal became more stronger and richer, right? What happened here was that there's a lead vocal, and then I'm also singing some extra notes that are not exactly the lead vocal notes, a little different, which is part of the scale. But together, it sounds nice. That is called as harmony. Now, we're not going to do exactly what I did here. This is just to explain what harmony means. In the current project also, I've added something like that. This plugin is one of the magical plugins that we're going to see, which gives you that extra tone. So this is without saturation. You're the one. It sounded a little dull. You're the one for me. Well, let's turn this on. You're the one for me. There's just a lot of clarity coming through when I add this. So what do we mean by that technical term of saturation? So I'm going to show you something in deep that explains clearly what saturation is all about. I have another random track here, and over here I'm going to put a plugin from utility, test oscillator. There's going to be a noise. Let's turn that off. I'm going to keep 500 Hertz. All frequencies are nothing but sound waves. So when I choose 500 on test oscillator, I am going to get a sound wave generated, which is 500 cycles per second. This is a little confusing. I'll link a video where you can understand more about frequencies. So now we are getting a 500 Hertz. Let's put the volume less. Let's turn it on. That's 500 Hertz. When you put an EQ below this, obviously, you'll just have one spike here at 500 because that's what I generated, right? You're not going to see anything else. Now, I'll show you something with saturation. So, let's leave the test oscillator as it is. I'm going to add a plugin from multi-effects, fat effects, stereo, and then I'm going to make a little bit of changes here, just turning this on. Let's analyze it in deep. Okay, so I'm going to keep a couple of plugins open. I'm going to turn on test oscillator and I'm going to move some things. It's going to become loud, so be careful with your headphones volume. I just push this down for now. So now there's just one 500 Hertz, right? But see, watch what happens when I move these things. Or let's move it to something else, soft saturation. Move it down even more. Now, look at that. I'm going to mute stereo out for now, but you're still going to see the signal. I just generated a single wave, 500 Hertz. That's all. But this is saturation, which is giving me all these extra lines that you see here. We did not choose, somewhere between 1000 to 2000 hertz, all these stuff. It's like automatically added, and you see like there's a lot of signals coming through. It's because of saturation, and they just enhance your signal. So if you see, without, the sound was like that, right? And it was okay. But with this, there's just a lot more clarity coming through it. Obviously, it's just a single sine wave, but this is the explanation behind saturation. You add a lot of signals on top of the main signal, which makes it sound nice. Now you know that saturation is very vital in vocal tracks, and that brings clarity. If you have an amazing song and you're looking for a mixing mastering engineer, don't forget to send me an email and I'll be happy to mix your songs. Let's look at the plugins that are my favorite, that really pops out the vocals and gives you that saturation. Let's look at stock plugins first. My favorite is from Vintage EQ Collection. All these three give you a beautiful and nice saturation. My favorite amongst these three is Vintage Graphic EQ. So when I put this, basically you don't need to do a lot of methods here. It's just a regular EQ, but in a normal EQ you will not get saturation added. In this EQ, by default, you're just going to get those extra frequencies added. Isn't that just beautiful? So I'm just going to push these a bit high. You're the one for me. So this is a regular EQ, and also you can control how much of saturation is needed by using this drive knob. You can push it low or high. Drowning in happiness, you're the one. You're the one. It's already quite high. So this is without. Drowning in happiness. Of course, don't change the volume, okay? So if you want to control the volume, just come here. Make sure only the effect is applied. Drowning in happiness. There's a clear difference, right? This sounds dull. You're the one. But there, I'm getting that sharpness out of it. This is one of my favorites. Another favorite plugin is Exciter that you see in Specialized. One of my favorite saturators also, and all these are stock. So I'm going to choose 8000 Hertz, which is usually the best frequency to add saturation, especially on vocals. Drowning in happiness, you're the one for me. Now I've just exaggerated it a bit, okay? So this is without. You're the one. That's a huge change, right? I'll show you one more. So if you go to compressor has this tiny knob called distortion, which is adding saturation. You're the one. So if this is your regular compressor, when you keep it to soft, you're the one. There was a volume jump, right? That's nothing but because of saturation. So it's pretty clear right now that saturation gives you clarity, but it also boosts the volume. If you don't want that volume increase, just make sure you balance it out with the output volume. Most plugins will have an output volume, but bring it down a bit. So regarding my favorite third-party plugins, one of my favorite is from FabFilters. There's a plugin called Saturn in FabFilters where you can control saturation at different frequencies. So I just divided it into three, and in this end, I can just change the presence or the treble, mids and bass. So imagine you cut this into 4 sections. That's how you deal with saturation. And the cool part is you have all these different types or like presets of saturation that you have, which really works well. Another one that's my favorite is all the SSL compressors and EQs that you see in Waves. Now this is an SSL EQ, which is really good for the addition of color that it gives. You know, it just pops out the color. You're the one for me. It's already pushing it a lot. You're the one. You're the one. So you heard it become clear. This is without. You're the one. And with. For me. So if you want to control the volume, as usual, come here and control it. So these are my favorite saturation plugins. So the most important part here is, do you have to add saturation on all vocals? My answer is yes. Add a little bit of saturation unless it is going to change the genre. If it is a jazz track, I might not suggest adding a lot of saturation. Then it becomes more bright and modern. Jazz has to have that vintage feel to it, right? So make sure you pay attention to the genre of the song. But Apart from that, saturation just makes the vocal sound so much more brighter. And if you haven't tried that in your vocal track so far, I suggest you try it as soon as possible because that's gonna make or break your mix. Here's a bonus tip. When I say saturation gives you clarity, there is a limit to how much you can add. For example, I'm gonna show this picture and just watch what happens when I increase the saturation a little bit. It does look good, right? But if I push it to the maximum, it's gonna look weird. It's not gonna look natural. That's the same thing with music. Yes, saturation just makes things colorful and more brighter, but pushing it too high will make the volume distort and it'll make it just sound unnatural. Don't push it too high. Saturation has to be added in a very subtle manner. Remember that this is the most important part in this entire video. So that is the end of this video. If you found this useful, don't forget to comment, share this with your friends. This is Florina Jain and I'll see you guys in another video.